us, but hello and welcome to Let's Talk About Accessibility in Design. Georgia, yes, you can type at any point in the chat. Sorry, let me address that. And then there's a Q&A section as well that I'll go over. This event is hosted by AIGA South Dakota. And for those who are not familiar, AIGA stands for the American Institute for Graphic Arts, and we are the local South Dakota chapter. I am so excited to see so many people join us today. And this is our first time doing something like this. So we didn't know what to expect, and we are overwhelmed and overjoyed by the response. We only have an hour, so we're starting off right away, and I'm going to get right into it. As the name suggests, we will be approaching the topic of accessibility and inclusivity under the lens of design. Both of those topics are vast societal and cultural issues that can feel like an overwhelming task to address. And so today we're going to try to break it down, how we as designers, artists, developers, marketers, just generally as citizens, how we can make our work more accessible and inclusive by hearing from our panelists and going on a journey with them through their experiences and learning their tips. So I want to encourage everyone, even though we can't hear you or see your faces during this, I want to ask you to ask questions throughout if you have any. There is a Q&A feature on this webinar, and I ask you to ask your questions in there if you have any for the panelists or us, because we're able to kind of keep track of them better. And if there's a chat going on, we might lose them. So at the end, we will answer those questions as time allows. I want to kick it over to my partner, Tim, to introduce himself.
Yeah, like Molly said, thanks for joining us for Accessibility in Design. My name is Tim Murray. I'm a designer at Jensen Marketing, an adjunct instructor at Augustana University, and president of AIGA South Dakota. And like Molly said, if you're not familiar with AIGA, it's a professional organization. And the South Dakota chapter, our three main priorities are connecting designers across the community to strengthen those ties, to be advocates for design, for just creative work in general, and third, to help creatives grow in their craft, specifically through speakers and workshops and mentorship opportunities. And that third part of our mission brings us to today's topic. And like Molly said, we feel like designers have a responsibility because we're creating work that we want to be accessible, and we want that work to be accessible to everyone in the audience. But it can be an overwhelming topic. So as Molly mentioned, don't forget about the Q&A. Go ahead and put questions in there as they occur to you. And we are excited to get started. Cool. And I want to say thanks to Molly for organizing and putting all the work in to make this happen.
Thank you, Tim. Yes, so my name is Molly O'Connor, and it's my 6th year on the board of AIGA South Dakota. I'm a senior designer at Lemonly, and Lemonly is a design agency in downtown Sioux Falls. And at Lemonly, I recently helped create the DIVE task force, which stands for Designing Inclusive Visuals for Everyone. Through DIVE, I help lead initiatives to make sure that our work is as inclusive and as accessible as possible. I want to share a little bit about why I am so passionate about de&i in design, a little bit about my background. Growing up, my father had a physical disability, and later in life, he lost his hearing as well. And I watched design continually fail him. I was fortunate to grow up in a very creative and resourceful family, and he and my mom were always modifying and altering designs to fit his needs. And so for a long time, because I was seeing this, I thought that it was the responsibility of those who didn't fit that ableist design parameter to figure out solutions for themselves. Now I know how wrong I was, and that most of those with disabilities don't have the means to modify designs. And oftentimes that's not even an option. So they are simply left out. As a professional designer now, I realize that the change starts with me, and it is my responsibility, and it's your responsibility to create a more accessible, inclusive world. Every day I'm learning how I can be a better ally and a better advocate and a change maker in this field. And seeing all of you joining here today, I know that you feel the same way. So that's what we're going to be talking about here today, and that's what we're going to be learning. I'll stop talking about myself, and I want to talk about our panelists a little bit. I want to welcome Kendra Gottsleben. She is the Marketing Communications Specialist at the Center for Disabilities at the University of South Dakota Sanford School of Medicine here in Sioux Falls. She is an author and a spokesperson on living life with rare disease and disability. Kendra is the founder and executive director of the nonprofit organization Rare by Design. Her career blends the two worlds in which she grew up, medicine and education. Kendra's memberships are numerous boards, advisory groups, and professional societies keep her actively engaged locally, statewide, and nationally. We have Kaitlyn Martinez. She is a senior developer at ClickRain, also here in Sioux Falls. You'll see a common theme with that. In her role, she specializes in developing accessible websites for clients and serves as a web accessibility expert for the agency. Kaitlyn makes it her mission to ensure everyone involved understands the importance of inclusivity by providing resources, expertise, and training, making the web a place where everyone has access to the same content, no matter how they utilize it, fuels her mission. Kaitlyn has spoken internationally and continues to stay on the forefront of this important topic. We also have Tana Zwart, who lives in downtown Sioux Falls. She is a self-employed media manager with experience largely in nonprofits. She is a disability advocate and chair of the Disability Awareness and Accessibility Review Board for the City of Sioux Falls, as well as a former national ambassador for the Muscular Dystrophy Association. And lastly, we have Hector Curriel, who is an artist living in Sioux Falls. He is originally from Lima, Peru, and he has always carried with him a love for art. He now enjoys being part of the community of artists in Sioux Falls, and he specializes in bringing out the area's natural beauty in his paintings. I am going to bring it to our panelists now to talk a little bit more about themselves, and I'll ask them to talk in the order that I introduced them. So Kendra, Kaitlyn, Tana, and then Hector. Can you tell us a little more about your work and how it intersects with the world of accessibility and inclusivity?
So I was born with my disability / rare disease. And so for me, dealing with accessibility in all types of design and in, physical like barriers in the community, but also design on computer, for me has always been a passion. And so I work here at the Center for Disabilities, and I'm a marketing communication specialist. And so we strive at trying to make everything that we share via social media, via email blasts, everything as accessible as possible, because there's so many different types of disabilities that we want to make sure that we are creating definitely not a barrier for the audience that we work with, because that's what we do. We are representing and helping individuals and families with disabilities. So
so I'm Kaitlyn, and so I, as Molly mentioned, am a web developer, and so I interact with accessibility pretty much daily. We work on project teams at ClickRain, and so even from the start of projects, I work with content and design and development just to make sure every stage of the process we're working on accessibility. And so I just love to make sure that everything that we do is accessible, even if a client doesn't ask for an accessible website, that doesn't matter. I'm going to give them one. So I think, just making sure that we're always thinking about others and how others are using websites is really important. And so it definitely is something I think about every day while I work.
Tana, can you tell us a little bit about yourself as well?
I hope my internet holds up here. I used to be the media manager for a local art nonprofit, and when they closed, I decided to try the freelance thing a while. And one thing I like about that is it gives me the freedom to kind of take on what projects I want and clients I want. And so I really like to focus on nonprofits and do disability related things when I can. One of the spaces locally that I've worked for is our MD group. That's the National Disability Employment Awareness Month. And so just taking on projects, marketing projects like that has really helped me become a better advocate in the sense that I get to understand more of what accommodations people need who have disabilities other than mine. I'm also really active in local disability advocacy. I'm the chair for the Disability Awareness Accessibility Review Board, like Molly said. And we're really just a resource for the community. And we do some outreach and campaigns and stuff. Artability, our art show is coming up in April, and that just features artists with disabilities. And then we have a sign campaign, Think of Me, Keep It Free, which we're thinking about expanding on. And that just kind of draws attention to the issues of accessible parking. It's widely misused, and it's just a different way to get people's attention about it and make sure that they're thinking about who they're really taking those spaces away from when they just park there for 5 minutes or whatever their excuse is. So I've also done some advocating for the Muscular Dystrophy Association over the years. And one of the things MDA advocacy is really pushing for right now is better air travel for individuals with disabilities. So that would mean better cabin design. So people can stay in their wheelchairs and get to the bathrooms. That's just not a thing right now. The Air Carrier Access Act was actually passed before the ADA. So planes just aren't held to the same standards as other public transit. And so that's been interesting to follow what people are coming up with for design solutions to that. But laws also need to change before that's ever going to change. You know, society initially as a whole just wasn't designed with individuals with disabilities in mind. They just weren't seen as contributing citizens. So there's been a lot of backpedaling and restructuring the last 30 years, which is why I think it's just so important that we acknowledge how crucial universal design is across the board for everybody, no matter their age or ability. So yeah, that's me in a nutshell, I guess.
Thank you, Tana. Hector, I will repeat the question one more time just to make sure that you can remember it. It was a while ago. So tell us a little more about your work and how it intersects with the world of accessibility and inclusivity.
Sure. Well, I am, my name is Hector Curriel. I am visual artist here in Sioux Falls, and always I had a passion for art since I was a little. And when I came to the United States, I started working as a professional since 2006. I have a studio downtown, and I do different kind of arts, from book illustration, editorial cartoon for papers, fine arts, special commission for portraits for older people. In my job, when I think about accessibility, means for me to facilitate to my customer the option to have what they're looking for. Sometimes it's hard for people express themselves, what their the ambition, what they wanted in terms of art. So I try to breaking down what they're looking for and giving options and be very flexible about in terms of what they really want to, and in terms of quality, time, even cost. No? Sometimes you have to be flexible because people always had the idea when you look for something is artistic, something means is a lot of money. It's not necessary, no? So you have to be explain to the clients what it means by that when you ask him for any in terms of the cost. No? And inclusivity for me is so important base because I am a minority. I am from Lima, Peru, bilingual. I speak in Spanish, is my, and also before that, working as an artist, I've been work as interpreter for Lutheran Social Service. So they give me a lot of base to about understand how the community, the immigrants, what they face, what kind of issues they face, no, in their daily basis, no? And they start culturally, because sometimes it's hard when you are not willing to understand the other side. So I think my role as an artist and trying to be inclusive with my art is create some like a bridge, connection with people, because I believe art is beyond the words, and the meaning is more about emotions. You can connect everywhere. We're connecting with emotions, and this is the first reaction we perceive when you see some piece of art. No? So everybody can connect it in that level at least. So this is also, I think, I try to represent different groups, and my art always bring to them. They don't feel like a minority in that regard. They can be part of the community, and they can contribute with the incredible baggage they have culturally, experienced life, and there's something I believe all in our city will feel beneficial with that. Mm-hmm.
That's great. It's great to hear all of your perspective and see how you're all approaching it. I'm curious about, like, as working designers and as people who are creating materials for the wide audience, like, what is your process when you think about accessibility and inclusivity in your work? Like, how do you approach a project?
I can step in first. So at Curriel, we have different team members that do different things. And so even from the start of a project with design, we make sure that any, more complex component of like a search or filtering is accessible, and making sure there's buttons on forms, and making sure that everything that we're doing makes it usable by everyone. We also make sure that color contrast it works for everyone. Even from the content side, make sure we're using proper headings and links don't just say click here, they actually explain what the link is for, because people who are using screen readers can jump from link to link, and so click here is very ambiguous on what that actually is going to get you. And then on the design side, always making sure everything I do starting out is accessible. And so I think it's really important to from the get-go, from the start, make sure that you're doing things accessible, because it just makes it so much easier to integrate into your processes.
I was going to say a lot of what she was saying. What's helpful, though, is if you do have a team. So like for me, we're a small nonprofit, so I'm doing all of that stuff. So it's depending on the project, it can be somewhat time consuming, especially like if they're doing a website, that's definitely time consuming. But even like starting at the beginning, like if you're turning something into a PDF, if you're creating at the beginning the document with what she was saying, how it reads it correctly, then when you run it through a screen reader program, you don't have to backtrack as much to fix things that maybe you might have missed, because then that's another process of going back and time management with that. For me, it depends on what it is. Like if it's a social media post, with the process for me figuring out what it is. Social media has done really much better. Like a lot of the programs now, like Facebook and Twitter and Instagram, have some of that stuff built in. So when you're talking about the process, it helps the process, because it'll have alt text capabilities in it, so you don't have to then embed that or something into certain things. So for me, it just depends on what the project is, then figuring out what the process needs to be regarding making sure that if it's a video, that it's captioned, some of that stuff.
Yes, for me, start from the point and understand what your client looking for, what kind of expectation they have, and working with that, no? Because sometimes they don't know exactly what, they have some idea, but they don't know how concrete idea. And my goal as a facilitator is explain the process from my point of view, to get what they're looking for and turn their art, whether working on some book illustration or working on some painting or any other artistic activity and trying to give in some information. It's important from the beginning, for me at least, in my process to working with my clients, is to get a very one-on-one conversation and trying to understand first what they're looking for and see how realistic it would be for me to do this and turn the cost, the time, and possibilities also regarding to the medium, size, those kind of things. No? And trying to even sometimes educating the clients, no, what is, because they don't know, they don't really need to know how we start or artistic process. So I try to explain what is my requirements from me. I can give you an example. I have many times, I had people come to my office and the studio with so emotional with a great idea about a book, and they're just talking about the book. They're very, very ethereal, not very concrete. And they say, well, that sounds very good. I think it's a good start point. But for me, in order to help you, what I need from you is your, for example, your portfolio, your manuscript, something we can see visual. I can see, and I start breaking down and turn the pages and turn the pictures as one picture, a double picture. So I try to educate, and I try to also give information in case they don't know how you crafting their manuscript, places that they can go, or giving some research materials I have handy, the way they can start. So I try to help the clients to reach that point, and they can give it something more concrete in order for me to start working with them.
Yeah. And what about you? How do you generally approach a project from an accessibility standpoint?
A lot of what Kaitlyn said for me, just being more conscious of those simple visual accommodations, like when I'm making a flyer, something like that, just not using color to convey information, or using the high contrast, separating structure from text. For me, as a user and consumer standpoint, my hands are weaker, so I have some dexterity and fine motor issues. Accommodations I like to see addressed are action and bigger spaces between form fields when I'm using a touch screen, shortcuts and autofills, so I don't have to type as much. Longer timeout windows are nice, and not as much scrolling too. So things you maybe wouldn't think about being necessarily accommodations, but they are.
I was going to say, just like what Tana said, that the reality of what society as a whole, if we could grasp our minds around it, is, I think so many people think adaptations or accommodations are these massive, huge things. Now, I know when we're talking about websites and things, those are very specific and those can be more detailed. But if you have people on staff like Kaitlyn, who's trained with that, and other people, then it's not as difficult. But the reality is, if it helps someone with a disability or rare disease in general, it's naturally going to help the whole population of the world. Because think of the simple design aspect of door openers that are on the doors, getting into buildings. Okay, how many times have you seen maybe a mother with a stroller pushing it so she can get her stroller through, or somebody carrying a bunch of boxes and doesn't look like they have a disability but uses it? So some of it is, if it makes it easier for an individual with a disability, it makes it easier for the whole public. And I think that's what people, designers in general, but people in general, just thinking of, it doesn't need to be so like, this is only for people with disabilities. It's, the stigma of that aspect, that's what Tana and I are pretty well versed in a lot of stuff, and that's what we really try to promote. Is it's going to help everybody if it helps someone with a disability.
That referred to as the curb cut effect,
Yeah.
where if you cut a curb for wheelchair riders. I'm sorry, Tana, what were you saying?
No, I was just gonna say that
Great.
I mean, people use it for bicycles, strollers, but people with wheelchairs use it too. The whole snow removal. You have to have snow removal, not just for people with disabilities and wheelchairs. You know, it's some of that stuff that, you know, even with accessibility websites, some people might just have a little bit of a vision loss, but not like completely. So just even that, making it so that you can make the website bigger, you know, it doesn't have to be they're legally blind or anything. It's just some of those things, wrapping the brain around that concept.
Kendra, I think that's a really great point. I appreciate you bringing that up. I also heard, I think everybody address that you consider these things right away in a project. Like it's not an afterthought. You don't get it done and then try to figure out how to make it accessible. You start step one with accessibility in mind and with that as the goal. All right, so I'm going to ask you the next question here. Without naming names, can you talk about any cautionary tales or projects or moments that a company or designer has gotten wrong in terms of accessibility or inclusivity?
I can go. Friends often send me things and ask me what I think about them. And a couple of weeks ago, a friend who works for Parks and Rec in a different city sent me a post that their marketing did for a new summer program space. And the illustration had kids at different stations interacting with each other. And the kid in the wheelchair was kind of off on his own, separate from his peers, and was the only one in the room getting one-on-one attention from one of the instructors, which kind of just reiterated the stigma that people with disabilities are special and need separate kind of help, instead of them being equal contributors to their projects and just simply hanging out with their friends and stuff. So there was that, but then the other thing was he was in a wheelchair that you would find at like the airport, which most people with long-standing disabilities have very custom wheelchairs that are maximized for independence and movement and comfort and stuff. So it's just important to include individuals with disabilities in your marketing and other stuff like that. But it's also important to do it in a way that's very empowering and relevant and displays equity. And sometimes that just means consulting with somebody with a disability and getting something back that way.
There was a commercial here in town, and it was kind of during like what Tana had said, National Disability Employee Month. And you know, having individuals with disabilities working in the businesses is, you know, everything that everybody really wants to do, but such business kind of promoted it in a non way that I would say that would work. It was more kind of like what Tana was saying with the kid off into the corner. It was kind of like spotlighted that they were standing and they were hugging this employee, talking about how they hire people with disabilities. And I say A for effort, because you are showing that you are being inclusive, you know, you're hiring all individuals, but the way it came off as a person with a disability was like, you can look at them as a regular employee, like we shouldn't highlight, look at us, we're doing this amazing thing. It's an employee. So a lot of that is what they didn't realize is you're kind of playing into the stigma of, oh, look, we hire people with disabilities and they don't do all the things that we do, but they can work. And so, like Tana said, with having someone involved is, if you're doing a commercial or if you're doing a campaign or you're doing anything related to, doesn't matter if it's an individual with disabilities or if it's a cultural background difference, you need to have them at the table or have little focus group talking about, how did this hit you, or is this appropriate? And I know that you can still do that and still have some criticisms, but at least you would have a background, or not a comeback, but saying the thing, we did have a focus group and this is, what they just said. But if you're going to be talking about accessibility, or if you're going to talk about campaigns and promoting some, you need to have somebody at the table that is aware of that world.
Well, in my case, I remember as a part of my art in residency, visited some nursing home, and when they had a different department, and memory care, assisted living, independent living. So working the memory care, I remember there are some people who really, they can function very well. They have some serious, maybe mental disabilities. And remember when I tried to working with the rest of the people and trying to include them in my group, they kind of tell me, no, they can't do this. And I feel like, no, let me try to doing something maybe different. No? So I think when you're working on people in that area, in that situation, I try as an artist to kind of change my goal. Maybe it's not just teaching, is ultimately what I'm trying to do is connecting with my art. And I try to understand and trying to work in the level of people, they able to do something. And I that was good for me. I'm expecting them doing finish some project or like doing something great, like other probably can do it. But for me, even person with serious disability, they still can engage and enjoy doing some kind of art. And this is my main goal when I go places like that, no? Connecting in some way at the level that each person.
Yeah, from the website of it, obviously there's the unfortunate side of, a lot of places will be sued for inaccessible content because someone can't, especially e-commerce, like if you can't order something off that site, you're not providing equal access to everyone. And so it's kind of a, you don't want to be sued for that, but it's just becoming more and more, especially education, banking, and e-commerce are really huge industries in that, because you really just need to be able to use websites just like a walk-in bank. Like some banks are only online. So if you can't use it, you're really denying access to someone in the same way you would deny access to them in a brick and mortar building. And so that's like the main caution you hear in website building is, yeah, you can have some legal action taken against you if you don't make them accessible.
We've touched on this a little bit, but I think if I'm a graphic designer tuning into this call or thinking about these topics, a lot of times we are called on to either create illustrations or create images, or to source images, whether it's stock photos or other images. So we're used to thinking about representation in terms of race and in terms of gender, but I'm curious about how you as working designers and illustrators think about representing, like what's a positive approach to thinking about representation when it comes to the images you choose or the illustrations you create? That's a jump ball.
For me,
yeah.
Finding photos, stock photos, finding graphics, anything that's related to disability that isn't what your typical stigma of disability is very challenging. I mean, we've grown, but it's definitely grown in the last several years. But as a person with disabilities, I always see the inclusivity of the race, ethnicity, but there's not of people with disabilities. And the token, if they do choose or put someone in, it's always someone in a wheelchair. That's what the token, like, here's a representation of a person with a disability. And AI says that's great, you finally got something in there. But not everybody that has a disability is in a wheelchair. You know, there's people who are blind, so you could have an image of a cane, or there's people that have service dogs, or, you know, so it's that I would say is one of the biggest things as we're speaking to designers and everything, is really working on that, but also in the aspect of Tana and I, you know, it's cold right now, but Tana and I like to do a lot of stuff in town. So like we do stuff where we go out to eat, we do that. So even when you're making videos of promoting a company or something, we go to the bank. I mean, you know, when you're talking about all of that, that's the true representation of our society and our world, that not all of us stay in our house all the time. So expanding that of like, the reality is when you talk about diversity, people do not think of people with disabilities. And the thing is, people with disabilities are the biggest minority in society, because you can be African American, gay, and have a disability. And I think that's where the conversation, people don't look at it that way. So you're if you're not, you're missing a market, like Tana and I, if you don't include us in the visual representation. And the other thing is, when we find a company that we see ourselves or somebody that's replicating us, you've got like a customer for life, because we don't see that. We don't see somebody that has a disability. And when you see a company that does that, you're like, oh my goodness, this company sees the value, you know, of me as a customer. And so that's the other thing, is trying to realize you're losing customers if you don't, you know, have us in there.
That brings up a good question. Oh, sorry, go ahead, Hector.
I think you did such a great point, and I had to be confessed. I'm trying to be inclusive in my art because it's so powerful. You know, sounds like a cliche, but we know that the expression, one picture speak better more than 1,000 words, right? And that is true in my experience when I portray people and different race, and I see people can see represent in that painting. No, if it's Afro-American, see another Afro-American in the picture, he feel like some kind of proud or recognition, like his value as well, like a person. And I had to confess, I don't probably work, I haven't included many people with other disabilities, like she mentioned, and something also I had to pay attention, definitely. But it's so powerful when we able to connect with people through include and or our some kind of diversity. It is just other thing I do besides to be a visual artist and singing, a singer, and I part of some mariachi band and been doing some presentation at school lately. And it is amazing when I went and sing in Spanish. And the high schools and elementary, and there's some minority kids, they turn their face, look at to me, and hear somebody speaking the language is such an incredible effect. And there's something I think applied the same in any other art expressions, no? Such as like art or murals or music as well too.
I think that begs the question, asking about how you think about representation. Are there any companies that you know of or designers that you could recommend that are doing this really well? If we as working designers are looking for a model to follow.
So like in the past several years, there has been major, improvements. But like, for example, Target, I mean, this is a national brand, but Target has, if you see some of the commercials, there's individuals with wheelchairs in the commercials that are just, there's kids with walkers, even in the stores, where they're hanging the clothes, they have the ads, they have individuals with disabilities. Sephora has had images of models in wheelchairs and different, Victoria's Secret just had their first individual with Down syndrome as a model. So a lot of it is, I think the bigger brands are starting to see that, but that's where the local brands, local businesses have, this is why we're having this, it's that conversation. There's fashion shows now, like in New York, that are starting to have, include models with disabilities, all different types. And, it's starting, but I would say right now, bigger brands I've seen. And what you want to realize is they're not doing it as like you totally notice the person in the commercial. I mean, like, that's not the focus. It's like kind of like what I was talking about before. It's like, hey, look, we have a person with a disability in the commercial, but it's in the mix. It's like what you do with any models, actors you have in your shoot. They're just in there.
Right, and it's normalizing it. That's really the goal, I guess. For me, some products and package design kind of came to mind, like Microsoft developed an adaptive Xbox that has a wide range of adaptive buttons and extensions that can be used depending on what the need is. And granted, my gaming kind of maxed out at Nintendo 64. It was pretty cool to try that system a few years back at a conference. Gaming is such a huge community platform right now, and for kids and individuals who do sometimes have to stay home more, they still get that community aspect and can still connect with their friends and stuff and interact that way. Degree developed an adaptive deodorant, and so it has different grips and easy application for those who have strength or dexterity issues with their hands. Olay Beauty Company, I think, developed a lid for their skincare jars that has like a pattern handle. Yeah, so that just allows a little more leverage and grip too. So and they're all things that anybody can benefit from. Again, it's just.
And that's what I think the concept is, what people need to realize is like there's older people that have a hard time opening jars. I mean, and that's the reality, is like, how many times have you guys tried to open a jar of pickles and you're like hammering it on the desk? Well, you're having issues. A person with a disability is certainly going to have issues.
This is really helpful. I think it maybe is a good time to turn to some of our Q&A questions, because there's a lot of really great questions in there that we're probably not going to get to all of them, but I'd love to get to some. One of the early questions, and some of these I'm grouping together, but there was a question about, are there tools, this is probably specifically for Kaitlyn, but are there tools that you use to evaluate a website once you are in the process of making it, whether it's a light versus dark mode, or what are some tools you recommend as you're thinking about developing a website?
Yep. So when you develop in the design phase, there's like color contrast tools that I know will be sent out in links after this that you can use to make sure, your headings, the background versus the foreground, have the right color contrast. But then when you get into development, there is even more, there's there's like automatic tools that kind of will check per page and like check your accessibility. One is Cite Improve, one is like a WCAG tool that you can just like click on its extension in your browser and it runs it automatically. So those are some things I use. And then overall, in a tool is only going to catch so much. And so really you just have to test it manually. And so I do a lot of keyboard testing. I use the screen reader on my computer and test that way. And so there's just a lot of different ways you can test. The automatic tools really help just bring awareness. And a lot of those things are really easy to fix. And so.
That's great. And like she said, we'll be including in the email that we send out after some of those resources. Related to that question, we have a good question about using color as a differentiator in a design is pretty normal tactic. Like you have a heading in one color and the next heading in a different color to indicate a change. But obviously that might not come through in a screen reader. So what do you, when you're thinking about designing for print or web, but what would you use instead of color as a differentiator for screen readers?
Yeah, there's so many ways you can differentiate things. And so if you're doing headings, like one is a larger text in bold and like another one can be, smaller italic or lightweight. There's a lot of ways you can do that. One way, like links within text, first there's the color contrast, but then they can be underlined or they can, there's just a lot of ways to call it out. A big area where I think we see this is like a form. And so if you submit a form and you had something wrong, if it's like red, just like, oh, we're going to outline this box in red, that doesn't, like if you can't tell the difference between if it was black to red, that's not helpful. And so including text where possible to explain what's wrong is really important. And yet visually, for sure, if you're doing a print piece, I think there's just so many ways visually that you can differentiate font without color.
Great. We've touched on this a little bit, but what are some standards that you see neglected the most?
Yeah, I think alt text is one of the easiest things to do, but also often easily forgotten. So any image that you upload, you should add alt text to, so that way it can, read out that image. So that's helpful. Even if like you're on a slow loading network, it will actually like list that alt text there for you. So it helps everyone. So that's one of the biggest ones that I see as far as that. And then click here links are definitely also like, I see that a lot where like, hey, click here to get to this, and it's just not descriptive enough.
You want to give an example of an alt text?
Yep. So alt text, yeah, it will just describe the image. So say like someone's walking their dog in the park. That's what you put. So it doesn't have to be anything super complicated, but just describe what's happening in the image as in depth as possible. You don't want it to get too long. Like you don't want it to be 5 paragraphs of describing the image, but just something simple, even of, yeah, like this person's walking their dog around the block or, something like that.
Great. This next question from Mike has to do with context where a lot, in corporate design, he says a lot is dictated by the brand standards. So in terms of color and font sizes and things like that, what are some strategies or how would you approach a situation where the designer feels constrained by a lot of the things that are sort of dictated by those brand guidelines?
Yeah, I think that's a common issue, and probably like the hardest part about some projects is that, there are brand guidelines. And a lot of times we can have conversations with clients of like, say you have yellow as one of your brand colors, like yellow and white are just not going to ever work together. And so like, can we slightly darken it when we're on this color? Like, are you okay with us slightly changing colors when we're on these different backgrounds, things like that. And sometimes, like, I think you have to go back to your brand colors. If they're really that inaccessible, they're going to be inaccessible in print, they're going to be inaccessible in web. And so maybe it's a larger conversation as well, which is hard, especially if you're a large corporation. But that might be something you have to go back and look at, is like, maybe we do need to alter our colors in order to do that. As far as fonts and font size, like really cursive fonts are very hard to read. And so the more you can stay away from that, the better. And then font size, as far as like development, I never like to make anything smaller than 14 pixels, which even to me, I don't like to make it even that small. Anything, 16 pixels or above is much preferred. And people are able to use their browser and like zoom in or increase font sizes. But I think it's even someone, if you're on a mobile device and it's like 14 pixels and you have to zoom in to read it, that's never a good sign.
And then some of the
Well,
things we do here at the center, like we do have like always wording at the bottom that, you know, but if you're doing it, if you're making it the right way, then usually you don't have to. But like we do say, like, if you need this in alternate format, please let us know.
Great. I'm a little offended that Kaitlyn doesn't like yellow and white together. But to repaint the whole room now. This next question is for Kendra specifically. Can you talk a little bit about the USD Lend program?
Yeah, so our LEND program is geared towards, so it's LEND stands for leadership, education, and neurodevelopment and related disabilities. And this program is kind of more clinical based, like that we don't really talk like developing websites and stuff, but it's like graduate level classes. So usual people that are in it are PT, audiologists, speech pathologists, educators, there's parents and things. So I did see that question, but I'm like, it's not specifically around designing. And maybe Molly would know more about USD with like learning design at USD, but a lot of the LEND program is just more giving awareness about working with individuals with disabilities, healthcare professionals, helping them also be prepared for when they go out into the real world, and including they do, like Tana and I were just last week, we're on a rare disease panel. So it's a class that's kind of like exposing the students to different, you know, not just people with disabilities, but also different types of populations that they might be working with. I don't know if you can answer that about Molly for about the design at USD or anything. That doesn't have anything to do with LEND.
In the sake of time, I'm going to keep it going on the questions, but I would be happy to talk to anybody who wants to reach out to me. And I will share my email at the end.
I think we just have time for one more Q&A question, which is too bad because there's a lot of great questions. But the last question I'll ask from the Q&A list is, you mentioned involving people who have disabilities with the process early on. The question is, do you have example? What is a good way to do that, to create focus groups here locally, or do you have other resources that you would recommend for involving people either in a focus group or some sort of other decision-making process?
Well, I believe Tana and I would be more than willing to help out. But I would, you know, a thing would be maybe connecting maybe with LifeScape, depending on the project that you're working on. You know, they have individuals with disabilities. Dakota Abilities has individuals with disabilities. Even if it's just people that you possibly know, bringing them in and having that discussion, and definitely varying disabilities, you know, because everybody has a different spectrum, but you know, the department, like Voc Rehab here in South Dakota, Voc Rehab, they work with a lot of individuals with disabilities. So looking for organizations or businesses that work with or have individuals with disabilities that work with them, that would be where I would probably start the conversation of, hey, we're doing this focus group, or we're making this product. We would love to get feedback on such and such.
Thank you, Kendra.
Great resources.
Tim, I know you said that was the last question, but I have one more. I just want to squeeze in at the end. I would love to hear if any of y'all have something that you're working on that you're excited about that you want to plug here before we end the panel.
Okay, I'll go. So I have started the nonprofit Rare by Design that Molly had mentioned before, and in March 31st, it'll be a year of it being a thing, and so we're excited. Tana's been a big help with designing all the assets that we've been using, that we are going to be putting on a style show, a runway to empower, and all the individuals who will be modeling will be showing what true diversity is. So we will have models with disabilities, we will have different ages, we will have different ethnicities. So the goal is to show what true diversity looks like here in Sioux Falls, and all the proceeds for that event will go to Breathe Bravely, which is another nonprofit which focuses on cystic fibrosis, which is another rare condition.
Tana, any project you're working on?
I would definitely say Kendra's show. Yeah. Sorry, I think my internet's stalling it. Yeah, Kendra's fashion show for sure. I think it's going to be a one-of-a-kind event for our city here, and the Artability show in April, first Friday. That will be at the Museum of Visual Materials.
And that's a very cool event too.
Great.
I want to say I am planning to work in some high schools in town where they work with new arrivals, immigrants, students. They have very low English or no English at all. But I try to find a way they feel comfortable and doing art when that doesn't require too much, obviously, English. So I will be tutoring those kids, and hopefully the way they can start to feel more comfortable in the city, and in the way they help to interact and integrate with the community as well.
That's great.
I don't have any specific project. Every project I work on, I try and include accessibility in, but I just wanted to spout a fact at the end here that 15 to 20% of your users are disabled in some different way. And so I think it's really important to always consider quite a large population that could be using your design, your website, anything.
That's a great closing fact. Thank you.
Thank you all.
We want to thank everybody for participating in this, both the panelists and everybody who's participated in the questions. We're keeping track of these questions, and we're going to try to get resources together in an email that will answer some of those that we haven't been able to get to. I also want to say, again, thanks to the panelists for taking the time to share your experience and your expertise that I know it has not come easy. Like I said, watch your email for recording of this Zoom call, as well as some resources that people have mentioned in passing. Don't forget about the style show, May 7th. I know Hector just released a graphic novel about Joe Foss that you should check out on his page, and the Artability show that Tana mentioned. So follow these folks' social channels for updates, and I'm sure they won't mind if you reach out and ask them questions about specific accessibility topics that you have about. And we, again, just really appreciate your time, everyone, panelists and participants. Have a good rest of the day.
Thank you so much, everyone.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you.
Bye.